family. Welcome back to the Explore the Extraordinary podcast. My name is Betty Guadagno, and today I'm joined by Robert. And Robert is an author, a spiritual explorer. He was one of our keynote speakers at our most recent in-person IANDS conference in Washington, D.C. And he's written a book, and he's here to talk about it. It's called Impressions of Near-Death Experiences, and we're so grateful for your willingness to come and serve the community here at IANDS. And so I'm going to toss it right over to you to share about the book and all of the mysticism that you've been experiencing while writing it. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Betty, for inviting me. And it's really an honor to be on your show. Thank you very much. And the wonderful thing is that there is 6 hours apart between us. We are on different continents, and yet we can still talk to each other. And I still find that magical. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my book that was published through IANDS, and that's very nice too, that IANDS thought it was important enough to publish this book. And it's a book with hundreds of quotes from near-death experiencers from all over the world, from New Zealand to Europe to Africa, South America, North America, you name it, it's in there. And it makes it international too, as well. And the objective that I had with this book is not to tell people what I think an NDE is, but that people can just, by looking at all the quotes, come to their own conclusion, what an NDE is, and form their own idea. And the best thing is to do it by reading a lot of quotes. And I always try to picture it as follows, that if you're in Amsterdam, I'm in Amsterdam, I live there. We have a Dam Square. On the Dam Square, there's a huge palace. If you're on the Dam Square and you're looking at the palace, you can see only the facade, the front side. You don't see the sides, you don't see the back side, you don't see the interior, which is magnificent. You only have a shallow perspective of the whole thing. You need to have more perspectives in order to get an idea of the real thing. And that's what I try to do with my book. I want to give you, the reader, as many views, many points of views from an NDE, so they can form their own idea. And what I did is to sort of organize all these quotes in 12 categories, ranging, of course, from getting out of your body, because that's where it starts. And then going into the last phase is getting into your body, which is not always very easy. And then after effects. But in between, I have a lot of things like information about veridical observations, because people can say, well, what are these experiences? Maybe they're a trick of the dying mind or so, or a lack of oxygen, or you name it, all these arguments to argue against near-death experiences to be real. And I think veridical observations are very, very important in sort of giving circumstantial evidence that NDEs are real. And I'd like to give the listeners an example. This is an example of, the word is veridical observations, and I find it a little bit scientifically. I'd rather call it verifiable out-of-body experiences. And this example of this gentleman who needed some bypasses around his heart. He was in hospital in the operation room, and the surgeon came up to him and told him what he was going to do. He gave him full anesthesia, so he was out. They covered him with a blanket. They covered his eyes, so he couldn't really see anything. There was a little curtain between his head and body, so even if he could peek through the taped shut eyes, then he couldn't see anything. Nevertheless, suddenly he was against the ceiling, looking down upon his body, seeing what the surgeon was doing and what the nurses were doing. And the funny thing was that the surgeon put his hands to his chest with his elbows pointing out. Can you picture that. So he stands there and he flaps his arms like that, and that's what the patient thought was so strange. And he also saw that the surgeon was wearing boots. He could see the whole procedure, but especially this little detail was something that struck him. Now, when the operation is over and he's recovered, he tells that to the nurses, and the nurses knew Bruce Grayson, and they phoned him because they understood that this is an important fact. And so Bruce Grayson came over and interviewed the surgeon and the patient and nurses. And so this is a well-documented example where an NDEer can tell things that he saw during his out-of-body wandering around. That could be confirmed later on, because the surgeon did this procedure with flapping the elbows. He didn't really flap his elbows, but what he did was pointing to the nurses what they should do. And he didn't want to point out or gesture and use his hands, because his hands were sterile, and he wanted to keep them sterile as long as possible. And that's this Japanese surgeon was, I think, the only one who did it like that, and that makes it so outstanding. But that's an important chapter in my book, because I think it's important for people to understand that consciousness can really exist outside your body. It doesn't need your body to exist. And IANDS published another book, that's The Self Does Not Die. I can recommend that book too, because it contains hundreds of these cases of veridical observations, and it gives circumstantial evidence that these experiences are real. Now, if you continue going on with the rest of the book, you will find life reviews, of course. They are real life changers for the people who've had those. And there is about the light, of course. There's also a chapter about distressing NDEs, because they are there. We can't just ignore them, because it's not a majority, it's a minority, but they still exist. And we can't just ignore them. So I had a chapter in it that I put together talking to Nancy Evans Bush, who is an expert in this area. And that's an important chapter too. And the other chapters are about that we are one. We are all together in this. We are actually one big whole. There are so many wonderful quotes to show that. And there's one story that comes to my mind. I'm conscious of the time. There's one story that I always tell, because that's a woman who was in her NDE, and you have to understand, if you're in your NDE and you are in this other place, you have all knowledge. There's no time issue. There's no location issue. You can be wherever you want to be. You can be in whatever time you want to be. You have all the knowledge. So she knew that once she had to go back again, she would lose a lot of that knowledge. And she wanted to go back again. Many NDEers don't want to go back. Some do, and she was one of those who wanted to go back. And then she thought, I'm going to remember this one line that says it all, that has all the things, or all the essence of what happens over there. And that one line is, all is everything and everything is one. All is everything and everything is one. So we are one. And what I always say to listeners, if I have a talk, I say, I hope that many people will value veridical observations and understand that all these NDEs are real, because that's kind of circumstantial evidence that they are real, that your consciousness can be separated from your body, and then the rest for me would be also true. So if that's true, then what are the main messages of NDEs? Well, the first one, of course, is unconditional love. That's seen so often. If you read an NDE or you speak to an NDE, they always talk about unconditional love. So that's paramount. That's the most important thing. And the other thing is that there is this oneness that we all belong to. That if I do something to you, I actually do it to myself. So if people would really understand that love is important and that what you do to someone else, you actually do to yourself, because you are part of that other person, is part of that oneness too, then people will change their way of life. They will be more conscious of this and be more conscious of the others, being nicer to others, being nicer to nature, and to animals, of course, very important. So, and yeah, another thing is, one of the other chapters is, why are we on Earth? And I find that also a very interesting chapter, because there are wonderful stories there of quotes from people. And I want to just bring out one. So I would like to tell you this story about the little girl, Christina. She was 8 years old at the time. She's adult now, and she was abducted by two men who tried to drown her. She was with her face underwater, facing up, so she could see the sun through the water. At the same time, she had a point of view from somewhere above and looking down on the whole scene. And that's something that's said more often. So people have dual view sometimes, and and in this case, she saw her father rushing over to her to rescue her. Now, during that time, she had her NDE, and in the NDE, she said, I was talking to someone, and that someone must have been God, because there was no one else. There is no one else. So I had a talk with God. That's what she said. And she said, God told me how to live my life, because it's very easy. It has a recipe. He had a recipe for me to follow, and with 4 ingredients. And the 4 ingredients were love, be loved, just be, and experience life. And I thought those were wonderful, because, well, actually the last 2, just be and experience life, those are things that are very easy. Anyone can do them by just breathing. You just have to sit on a chair and you do that already. But the first 2, like love and be loved, it requires action. You need to do something for it to do it. And giving love may be sort of easy, but many people also find it easy to accept love from someone else. So both things are things that require action. So with that, it's more or less, well, there's so much to say about my book with all the quotes. There are so many quotes, and it's very nice to go through them. Actually, I find it a very good book, and it's not because I wrote it, but it's because of all the NDEs who actually wrote it with their quotes. So that's what I always say.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, so a couple of things came up for me while you were talking that I want to ask about. And I think the first thing is, did you enter this experience of wanting to write the book as a skeptic, or have you always been a believer? What's kind of your spiritual journey been like with finding this information and really throwing yourself into it, the information of near-death experiences?
Good question. Well, actually, I was raised Roman Catholic. My mother was very much a believer, and I was brought up with hell and purgatory and stuff like that. And only when you're really nice, you have the chance to go to heaven right away. And I always thought, wow, I don't really believe that. That's for me, it didn't feel well. But my mother said it and the church said it, so it must have been good or true. So then, when I was studying in economics in Groningen, I came across this book by Raymond Moody, Life After Life, and in it there was this story of a woman who was having her life review, and in her life review, she of course reviewed her life, and there was no one judging her, and there was unconditional love, and all the other stories were about unconditional love. Actually, I understood very well. It resonated with me so well that, of course, when you are in the presence of unconditional love, and then unconditional is something people really need to understand what it is. There's no conditions there. If you are in such a presence and you see your own life, you don't need anyone else to judge it. You can do it yourself, and even that's not necessary. That's what I understood from NDEs. No one judges you, but you don't need to judge yourself either. You can just look on, see what position you had or what your role was in life, and that's all. There's nothing. Nothing is really wrong there. The words wrong and right are human words. They are colored by our upbringing, by morals, by religions. I mean, the morals now, or what is good and bad now, is totally different from 100 years ago or 500 years ago. You name it. It changes. It's not stable. Like
Wow.
witches. I mean, we killed witches because they were bad. So that's totally different from how we look at witches now.
That's so true. Yeah. I mean, yeah, everything shifts. And I think that the conception of right and wrong is fluid. And maybe that's something that we forget. And I
Exactly.
know that there's so many people who listen to near-death experiences on YouTube, on podcasts, that are, some of them are looking for hope, to hear the
Yeah.
message that they will not be judged. I know that I come
Yes.
across that a lot in my own life. People, the fear of judgment, the fear of hell. And yeah, I think the only way to really go to hell is by putting yourself there in your thoughts presently, like that fear of going
Yes.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Did you have any quotes from people who had distressing near-death experiences in your book?
Yes, yeah, actually, I did. There is a whole chapter, as I said, in my book, and also quotes from people who had distressing NDEs. Let me go over that a little bit, because the most important conclusion from that chapter is actually that you cannot say that bad people will always have distressing NDEs and that good people will always have blissful ones, because there are not a lot of distressing NDEs out there. It's a minority, though there are still sufficient to draw a number of conclusions, and one of them is this one, that anyone can have a distressing NDE. That's maybe not very nice to hear, but that's the case. Let me give you an example of Daniel Brinkley, for instance. He was, as he said himself, he was a bad person because he was nasty. He teased, he bullied others, stole their bikes. Then later on, when he was adult, he went working for this American organization that went abroad in other countries and shot or killed people that they didn't like. Yeah, that happens. And one time he took out a whole hotel with a bomb to kill one person, but he killed 50 others at the same time. Now, he had his NDE as a result of a lightning strike while he was on the phone. But his NDE was blissful. He had a life review. He saw what he did to others. And the interesting thing with life reviews is that you don't only see it from your own perspective, but you also see it from the perspective of the others. So you really need to understand what that means. So it means that you are those others for a little time. You feel what they have felt. Now, he felt not only the people that he killed and what they went through, but he also felt the results with the women and the children that these guys, most of them were guys probably, left behind. So these guys left women and children behind, and he felt all the feelings these people had. Now that's really very direct, that you are those others. And that's what I mean with oneness. We are one. And in life reviews show that very clearly. Now he was a bad person and he had a very nice life review. And I have another example of a Kathy McDaniel, who was brave enough to write this book about her distressing NDE. And she was an, so to speak, common person, a woman like anyone, like many women she actually didn't kill 50 people in a hotel with a bomb or so. She was an all normal person, and yet she had a distressing NDE. Now, in her NDE, there were things like AIDS. She was contaminated with AIDS. She was prostituted. She was horribly assaulted and things like that. And the thing is, she later said she thought of all these things she went through, and she said, well, some of those were fears that I had myself of AIDS. I had a judgment on prostitution, and there it was in my NDE. And now you need to find a different cause for why these distressing NDEs occur. And no one really knows, but Nancy Evans Bush came up with an explanation, and she said, well, it's still your collective conscious that's still working, or your own background, your own things in your life that pop up during that phase. And I think she's right. I think that could come from there. But there are other quotes, and I would like to leave the listeners with a wonderful quote from Chris Carlson. He was having his near-death experience, and he explicitly heard that there is no purgatory and no hell, and that's what he heard. And there are others. Others said, there is no hell. We all go home. We all go home. And that's another reason. If we are all one, why would part of that oneness be left in distress? That's not logical. It's nicer to see it as one whole big thing that is all unconditional love.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, even from my own experience as well, like I led a very, like dark life where I caused a lot of harm. I didn't kill 50 people, but, like I did, terrible harm to other people. And I still ended up in that beautiful space of oneness. So, I mean, like if I can, then anybody can. Or if this guy who did all these things that maybe in society we might say are just absolutely condemning and there's no way to forgive, and he ended up there, then exactly. Yeah, I have every ounce of faith in the world that we all end up in that space. And yeah,
your story is wonderful too. I heard your story on IANDS in Washington, where you said that, and it's such an interesting, beautiful story. What you went through in life, that's incredible, and you had this wonderful, blissful experience.
Thank you for the compliment. Your check is in the mail. More compliments, please. I really appreciate it.
I would recommend people to look at your presentation. It's
Thank
really
you so
wonderful.
much. Yeah. So one of the other questions that came up for me when you were talking is, how do you exercise these principles in your own life? So you've heard all of these beautiful things. Let's talk about the concept of oneness, like specifically. How do you exercise oneness in your own life? How do you make these principles digestible and relatable in the day-to-day?
Yeah, it's, I always say to people in talks that near-death experiences are experiencers are no saints. They have their flaws and they are still human and they make mistakes. And I'm not even a near-death experiencer, so I make a lot of mistakes still. But that's where I think that's what I tried to say just before, that if the general public would really go into this matter and understand through veridical observations that these near-death experiences are real, that there is circumstantial evidence for them, that they would look at the messages, and the messages would be unconditional love and oneness. Now you ask how I put that into practice, and that's where I realize that, and that changes my attitude, I think, towards others and towards nature, because I understand, I more and more I understand the concept of oneness. So what I do to you, I actually do to myself, or I don't do it to myself. I do it to the universe, and I'm part of that universe. So I will feel that myself. It's not something that I can't just do something to you, hit you, and then walk away and think, I don't feel anything. It's you. You're in pain. It's not me. I will be in pain too, especially during my life review. But also, I heard the whole universe. I heard the Supreme One. The Supreme One is us all. I don't like the word God because it's culturally colored. There's so much to do about the word God. It's, by the way, the real thing is much bigger than any one religion. So yeah, that's the way I think I bring it into practice. And of course, I'm a human. I have flaws. I make mistakes. I made one today.
I love that. So what's your relationship like with your friendships, your family, as far as you being so immersed in the near-death experience culture? What do they think of that?
That's funny that you ask me. This book of mine that I published through IANDS, Impressions of Near-Death Experiences. I presented that during my keynote speech in Washington. That was nice. It was successful. I think I had a nice reaction from the people in it. But I'm going to do that here as well in the Netherlands, for friends and family and for people who are interested. So I rented a big a church kind of wonderful construction in the center of Amsterdam. And I have invited my friends. And the funny thing is that I know which friends are interested and which are not. And then one of the friends said, oh, of course we are coming. We're very interested in how you are going to talk about it and how you present yourself. And I said, well, it's about the message. So I know you're not really interested, so you don't really have to come. You don't have to show up, but you're welcome anyway. So I know there are people very skeptic about this. And, skeptics are to keep us sharp, to really think of how we should see things or say things, or maybe where we should do some more research. But real skeptics, I really don't like. If you show them these critical observations, if you talk about them and they refute them, then my job is done. I said it. I tried to convince them. I don't continue doing that. It's like talking to someone who thinks the earth is still flat. I can show them some proof, but if they don't want to see it or they don't want to believe it, fine with me. You just go ahead and live your life thinking Earth is flat. I don't mind. And in the case of near-death experiences, the Supreme One will still love you, even though you don't believe all these NDE things.
Yeah. And I also think, well, when we talk about the law of oneness, like these skeptics are actually versions of us. So I know, like for myself, I was very skeptical before my own experience. And even after my experience, I was still super skeptical as well. So when I see somebody that is skeptical, I just think like, wow, maybe they're going to come into awareness, and that will be such a cool shift for them, like, and it will be nice to witness it. Or maybe in this lifetime, they're not meant to, like everybody's on their own spiritual journey, experiencing their own things.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's all okay. Everything is always in divine right order. I just want to see if there's anything else that you want to share about to feel more complete about the time together today. I've really enjoyed this conversation so much, and I'm so happy that you've completed this beautiful work of art, and you shared your craft with us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
No, maybe one quote that I have from my book. That's very nice. That I have a friend in the Netherlands who had a near-death experience, and she passed away last year. I mean, really, she didn't come back again. But when she had her near-death experience, she was really in this light, and she felt. This is what she said. This is her quote. I feel completely perfect, completely one with the light and the love, and I know it is God. I am in God, and God is in me. We are one. Perfect unity. I thought that was wonderful. And there are more of these quotes in the book.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share with us. And we'll have all the links for you in the liner notes of this episode. And thank you for your service to the community. It's really been a pleasure. So grateful to connect with you.
Thank you for having me on your show. Thank you very much.
Of course. We'll see you next time.